or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for me and the gospel. I can't read any farther because I have to give you the context of what's happening here. Remember last week, Jesus said to the rich man, sell everything. And the rich man said, I can't. And he walked away sad. And then Peter, the guy who always has the right thing to say, basically says, we've left everything to follow you, Jesus. You know, this guy, he can't sell all his stuff to follow you. But Peter says, but Jesus, we did. We've left everything to follow you. And so then Jesus doesn't put Peter down for that. He actually lifts up the situation. He says, no one who's left all this stuff. And remember, in that day, people would have to leave family sometimes. Peter's family were Jews, and in just a couple weeks, Jesus would be dead and raised and then back up into heaven. And then Peter would be talking to his relatives, and he would be like, I've seen Jesus, the resurrected King, the chosen one of God, the divine Son of God. And all of his friends and relatives and neighbors who are Jewish are like, no, the high priest, our Jewish high priest, condemned that man to death because of his blasphemy. And Peter's like, okay, well, here we're at a crossroads. We're at an impasse. I can't go down your road and you can't come down my road. And so one of us or both of us have to leave. And Peter will someday have to face leaving even more than he's already left, leaving family behind, leaving relatives and friends behind. And that happens throughout the centuries. People have frequently given their lives to Jesus and then felt shunned or turned off from their family. Maybe some of you have some family members that have all but rejected you because you are a church person or because you believe in Jesus or something along those lines. And Jesus says for all those people who've left that stuff, and he even says fields, who've left fields. Now, just to let you know what that means, if I'm in a field, I'm working the field. So if I leave a field, it means I'm no longer working in that field. So in a sense, field is a metaphor for the place where I get it done, the place where I do my stuff, the place where I find my fulfillment, where I have my purpose, the place where I work. And Jesus says, you might have to leave that too. No one who's left these things, okay, now let's look at the rest, will fail to receive. No one who's left these things will fail to receive 100 times as much in this present age. I'd love to put a period there and end the chapter because that would be awesome. Jesus gives you a better life. No one who's left all this stuff will fail to receive 100 times as much. You have to leave a family? That's okay. Jesus is going to welcome you into a brand new family that's 100 times bigger. You had to leave your sense of purpose or your sense of work. You had to leave that place of operations, whatever it might have been. That's okay. Jesus is going to give you a brand new identity, a brand new purpose, a brand new meaning in life. That's awesome. 100 times better than the previous one. That's great. And he even lists it. He says, in this present age, homes, brothers, sisters, mothers, children, and fields. It's all so good. Along with persecutions. It's like, man, why is that one there? Because it was so good. If we just remove that one, then everything's fine. And in the age to come, eternal life. Okay, that's good too. But it's that middle one, the persecutions, that I don't like so much. This doesn't sound like good news. Now, up until now, we've been talking all about how the message of the Gospel of Mark is good news. And now we're coming to a section where Jesus says, if you leave all these things, which, wait a minute, that's not good news either. I don't want to have to leave my family. I love them. That doesn't sound like good news either. Jesus is saying something along the lines of, if you leave the stuff you know, if you leave the stuff you possess, if you leave the stuff that you call yourself by, this is my identity stuff. If you leave all that and come and follow me and be part of what I'm about and be part of the gospel, the message that I'm teaching, then I will bless you. But it requires leaving, and then the thing you get is persecutions. This doesn't really sound like all that good of news. Unless you weigh it on the scale and you decide that eternal life is worth that much to you. Let me ask you to go ahead and make yourself a pros and cons list. On your note sheet there's a little chart. And I want you to think about the things that you have to leave, the things you might have to lose following Jesus, and the things you might be able to gain. Focus in on that left side, and I want you to be serious. Maybe in your life there is a family relationship that you kind of have to lose if your heart is completely given over to Jesus. Maybe in your life there's something else going on that it's like a habitual sin or something that you know you have to lay aside if you're really going to follow Jesus. Maybe it's something else. But what is it that you might have to lose if you gave your heart completely, 100%, totally to Jesus? I'm going to give you 60 seconds. I'm not going to talk. You're just going to write down some thoughts. Go ahead. Now, you might be able to put down all manner of things in the right side of that table. You might put down self-esteem. Jesus tells me he loves me, and that's good enough. You might put down a new sense of purpose. You might put down any number of things. But in the passage here, Jesus gives us 3 things that you need to put down over there. Number 1, a new family. Number 2, persecutions. And number 3, eternal life. Jesus says, if you give up this other stuff, you'll get a new family. Yes, you'll also get persecutions, meaning you will have more times, more opportunities for someone to make fun of you. In the time of Jesus, the persecutions meant some of them were going to die, gruesome deaths. Some of them were going to be hung from crosses or burned at stakes or beheaded or hung. It's all manner of persecutions. Some are just going to be ridiculed, made fun of. Maybe you've experienced a tiny portion of that. None of us have experienced anything like what they experienced back then or what's going on in the rest of the world today. But persecution is always a part of following Jesus 100%. Many of us have decided we're going to be cultural Christians. We're going to be just as Christian as the culture will let us be without persecuting us. And because our culture is Christian enough, we can follow most of the bases without having to actually push the envelope and be one of those radical people that might get made fun of. But maybe, just maybe, Jesus says, I want you to push the envelope and be all sold out to me. If you do, persecutions are likely to come. And then he promises eternal life. So your question is eternal life good enough to outweigh all the rest? Is eternal life important enough to me that I'm willing to accept persecutions, I'm willing to enter a whole brand new family, and I'm willing to lose those things that I'm afraid to lose? Is eternal life worth all the rest? Well, I know it's hard for us to think about losing stuff, giving up stuff, laying stuff aside. But honestly, chapter 10 is the soft way Jesus said this. Chapter 8 is where Jesus gives us the real heart-wrenching stuff. In fact, go back to chapter 8, and we're going to see something Jesus says that is, I believe, the highest calling, the most difficult passage in the Bible. Chapter 8, beginning in verse 34. Then Jesus called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. Once again, for Jesus and the gospel. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels. Jesus' line at the beginning says that this isn't about losing family or job or identity. It's about something far more stringent. It's about losing yourself. It's about denying yourself. Last week we talked about grace. We talked about how, listen, there's no way you can live good enough to be good enough for God. And so we have to rely on God's grace. And that's an awesome thing. And many of us say, okay, God's grace, that's wonderful. I'm going to receive God's grace. Now I don't have to worry about living according to all those regulations and rules and do's and don'ts and things. I just live by grace. And now you're telling me that I have to completely deny my entire life, my entire self, and give myself over completely to Jesus? That sounds like a high calling. I'm going to rely on grace. But you know what? This is grace. Because grace says you can't do it on your own. Grace says you can't do anything on your own. Grace says the only way you can ever do any of this stuff is if Jesus does it for you. And if you're still breathing, he can't do it for you. Unless we totally die to ourselves, there's no room for Jesus to totally work in us. This is not works, work harder. In fact, if you pay attention to this, there's nothing in here that says self-improvement. There's nothing where Jesus says, listen, try harder, work better, do better. He doesn't say that. And instead, he says, what I want you to do more than anything else is pretend to be dead. Deny yourself. If my body and my life, if I'm dead, then I'm denying myself. There's no indulgence there. There's no selfishness there. If I'm dead, then there's nothing left for me to do for myself. So if I have any ability to do anything at all, if I'm dead, all my efforts have to be for something else, for Jesus, for the sake of the gospel, which implies the message that other people need to hear. See, that's what Jesus is getting at. He says, deny yourself and take up your cross, which for them, of course, was a symbol of execution. Our symbol of execution is the electric chair. So imagine this. If Jesus were to say, deny yourself and strap on an electric chair and go walking around with it, follow me. Wherever I go, you're going to be in an electric chair ready for someone to flip the switch. At any moment in time, the switch could be flipped. You're all strapped in.